Okay, we should start. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our today's Ergon Professional Hub seminar. We were waiting for some people to drop in, but I think we should start now. So the title of our today's seminar is Back to Basics, Interviewing for Jobs. And our speaker today is Maureen Rooney, whom many of us know very well. And I had really wonderful time working with Maureen to make this happen, and she has been extremely enthusiastic in sharing her vast knowledge and experience with us today. Maureen is currently leading the effort of training as head of training and development at New York City Health Plus Hospitals, Coney Island, which is part of one of the largest municipal healthcare system in the United States. Previously, she was the VP of Corporate Training and Financial Recruiting at Concepts in Staffing, as well as the CEO of her own career development firm. As a recruitment professional, Maureen is well versed in the interview process, which is really one of the major hurdles for professionals seeking jobs. Today, Maureen will be talking about her take on how to prepare for an interview and what to expect while in one. So before starting, for many of the people who are not familiar, I would like to speak a little bit about the Ergon Professional Hub. So what are we? So Ergon Professional Hub is basically, it's a group of professionals who made an effort in answering the need of many, including ourselves, in attaining professional development. So whether it's entering workplace or breaking into a new industry or having skills development at your disposal, Ergon can provide resources to allow everyone to learn, share, and grow in their careers. It is, after all, a community effort where many people across many disciplines help each other out through one-on-one mentorship, seminars such as this, as well as opportunities for networking. So all Ergon events and services are powered by volunteers and free of charge. And if you're interested in being a mentee or want to hit the call of the hour to help others and become a mentor, then please contact us. We'll be excited to have you as part of our community. So thank you once again for joining us. So with that said, I'd like to point out a few logistics of tonight's event. So in this Zoom meeting, only Maureen and I will be speaking through the calls. There will be a Q&A session after Maureen's talk. So I would request you to write any question you have on the chat window, and Maureen and I we will try to convey those answers. So without further delay, let us resume our seminar, and I would give the floor to Maureen to show us her presentation. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Let me share my screen with you. Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Rezi, for such a kind and generous introduction. And thank you to Ergon for inviting me to be with you. There are many elements in a full-bodied job search process, but we're only going to be focusing on one tonight, and that's about job interviewing skills. So let's get started. What's the scope of our talk tonight going to be? We have pre-interview preparation. We've got your elevator speech. There's a reference list. When does the interview really begin? What do you do during the interview? What are good questions to ask while you're involved in the interview? How do you manage tricky interview questions? What happens after the interview actually ends? And actually, when does the interview end? So let's get started. Pre-interview preparation is really important, and we're going to be referring back to these three elements throughout the presentation. But the first element here is research your employer. You need to use, obviously, lots of internet resources, things like Hoover's, Bloomberg, the Wall Street Journal. If there's an external recruiter, meaning outside of the company, you want to be talking with them. You want to look at things like Glassdoor. What do their employees have to say about them? You need to fully explore the company's website. You can get your hands on any of their marketing materials. Basically, you want to be able to identify the size of the company, their products, their services, who are their major competitors, where are they in a growth or a retraction cycle themselves, who are the other major players in the industry, what mode are they in now? M&A, they merging or acquiring other companies? Are they overhauling any of their major systems, like their accounting systems or their internal IT infrastructure? Are they investing in capital? And what are their future plans? The second element is to research the details of the job. One of the things that you really want to find out is whether or not there are going to be any tests that are required of you. So are they going to test your internet competencies, for example? You want to find out in what areas so that you can certainly bone up and review in advance. You also want to identify what the hiring process is going to be. Try to find out how many rounds of interviews they anticipate. Will the interviews be individual or group interviews? Have they identified other candidates at this point? How many of them? And try to find out who the ultimate decision maker is. And finally, you need to prepare yourself. You need to identify your accomplishments, and especially those accomplishments that align with this particular job, and to have your stories ready to tell in relationship to those accomplishments. Adult learning theory says that if you have a lot of content you want people to remember, the best way to nail that is to tell them a compelling story. So here's an elevator speech. This is an example of something to use when you first begin an interview and they ask that open-ended question, tell me about yourself. Hello, my name is Maureen Rooney. I'm looking for a senior level editorial position in a newspaper or a magazine. I have more than 16 years of editorial experience as a writer, editor, and researcher. I write for a wide range of media, including newspapers, magazines, the internet, and television. I've written extensively about architecture and design and contributed 2 essays to the book, Icons of Design, the 20th Century. I've also written dialogue for several episodes of the Pokemon television show. So what is the elevator speech? What is, let me just move these out of my way, I'm sorry. What is an elevator speech? It's essentially a 30-second commercial that's brief and concise. It says, who are you? What you do? What's your largest accomplishment? And what you have to offer to the company? And why are you looking for a job? And what are your future plans? This is an example of probably what's a more traditional elevator speech. Traditionally, elevator speeches are used during your networking phase of your job search. And it says essentially all of those elements in the previous slide. But at the end, you're going to be using it to ask the person, who do they know that you might be able to speak with, who could perhaps shed some information to help you along the job search journey. It is not asking them if they have a job for you. It's about networking, and if they have opportunities, they're going to then pro-offer those without you asking for it. That's not the point of your elevator speech. Your reference list. This is not something that you put on your resume or attach to it. Initially, it's part of helping you get started with your networking. You want to identify 12 to 15 business and personal references, and you write them down on a single sheet of paper or multiple sheets of paper. And these are the folks that you're going to begin to reach out with and use your elevator speech on them. You're going to include their name, their current title, their current organization, the current contact information, and no more than 3 sentences on their relationship to you or how you know them. When you actually have a face-to-face interview, you're going to prepare, you're going to look at this list and reduce it to the 3 and no more than 5 top references that would be mostly aligned with the particular position that you're interviewing for. And you're going to print out a sheet. Potentially, you can use it as a leaf behind, but sometimes when you first go to an interview, you start off with HR and they'll give you a paper application that you need to fill out. And part of that is often asking for your resume or for your references. So you can just attach it, or minimally, you'll have all of that contact information in one place ready to go. This is a sample list of a reference list. It's a little bit unique because if you have time to read through each one of them, you'll see that each person was referred on then to the next reference. In bold, I've highlighted some of the specific things that that person can speak about for our Joe Blow reference here. We're going to be talking about Joe in a couple of different places here tonight. But you see that his first company closed. That owner referred him on to one of his networking contacts. She then sold the transportation part of her company, but offered him a job to stay working for her. He, however, chose to move to the new umbrella company because he really wants to be a driver. In this third company, the CEO was very proactive on a daily basis, was down on the loading docks, making sure things were going right. And he saw the kind of work ethic that Joe Blow had, and he awarded him 3 times in 1 year Driver of the Year. So again, it's a way of highlighting your accomplishments, but the kinds of things that they can speak to on your behalf. So when does the interview really begin? You see 4 tiles here on the right-hand side. And the first one says closing the deal. Closing the deal is a piece of sales terminology. And trust me, selling yourself is an essential part at every step of the interviewing process. You need to sell the fact that you are, in fact, the best person to fill their need. Closing is a sales word that essentially what that means is that you influence someone to take a particular action that you want them to take. Might be signing the dotted line to to buy something from you, but in this instance, it means closing the deal. You're getting them to offer you the actual position that you want. Each major sales deal is filled with mini sales closing along the way. And so in your job search process or your interviewing process, some of those steps are your cover letter. The closing of that is to get them to read your resume. The reason you want them to read your resume, you close it on getting that first interview. After the first interview, you use then to get the second interview. So each of those steps are separate places where you're closing the deal, getting them to take the action that you want them to take. Our second tile says your first contact with the company, your written materials, or a phone call. So your first contact can be either of those things. However, remember that you only have you don't get a second chance to make a first impression. So however you make that first contact in writing or a phone call, your materials have to be pristine. They have to be professional. Parking attendants, security guards, receptionists, secretaries. Let's assume you're going for a more senior level job. What do they have to do with you? Well, every person that you encounter in a face-to-face interview potentially has influence with the senior decision makers. You don't know that every night on his way home, the CEO stops and has a chat with the parking lot attendant because both of their hobbies happen to be restoring antique cars. So you want to be impressive to each person that you want. Essentially, you want to park your ego at the door, treat everybody with dignity and respect, remember your etiquette, and most of all, be humble. Um, our final tile here says coffee, lunch, or dinner. There are many times where you might be invited, especially today in the days of COVID. You know, office buildings are closed, people are working in alternate locations. You might be asked to meet in a Starbucks or another kind of coffee shop. You might be invited, especially on a second round, to go to lunch to meet with the next level of senior exec. Or if you're they might ask you to arrive the night before and then invite you to dinner with a group of senior level execs at somebody's country club, for example, or a really nice restaurant. So whenever there's food or drink involved, understand that even though there are less formal situations, they are absolutely part of the interviewing process. So number one, remember your table manners. Second of all, what do you order? Well, stay away from the most expensive thing on the menu for sure. But even more than that, choose food that literally is easy to eat. The last thing that you want to do at a fancy dinner is to order a whole lobster in the shell, where your attention is to trying to get the lobster meat out of the shell. During these food or drinking events, your goal here, your job is to be engaged with everyone, making eye contact, and not worrying about what's on your plate. So order something that's easy to consume. And then the final issue at these events has to do with alcohol. Um, do you order a drink or not? Usually, the answer to that question is no. But in particular, if it's a dinner event and everyone else at the table is ordering a glass of wine or a cocktail, and you would like to have a drink, assuming you enjoy alcohol, one drink is fine. But I would ask that you seriously limit it to one drink, even if other people are having multiple rounds. The issue is that you need to stay clear and focused during the particular engagement here. And in the morning, you need not to be foggy when you go in first thing in the morning to begin your face-to-face process with folks. So what happens during the interview? Well, the first arrow here says ask everyone for their business card. We're going to talk more about how you use that a little bit further into the presentation tonight. But in today's day and age, you don't necessarily have a face-to-face interview. You may have a Zoom interview, especially on round one. So if you're on Zoom, you're not going to be able to get someone's physical business card. So the challenge here then is to find out in advance exactly who's going to be part of the Zoom interview and get the exact spelling of their name, their formal title, their phone contact, and their email contact. Get that in advance because you're going to be using that very early on. And so have that for your advantage when you can't get the physical business card. Find the interviewer's hot buttons. What are hot buttons? Hot buttons are unspoken concerns or wishes of the interviewers. Remember that every interviewing process is a two-way street. You're interviewing the company as much as they're interviewing you. You need to discern, is this a place where you really want to work? And so finding out the interviewer's hot buttons, those unspoken things that they're really looking for, begins to shed light on the kind of person that you might be working for and whether or not you think that ultimately that's going to be a good personality match. So how do you find out what their hot buttons are? Well, you ask open-ended questions, things like, what do you see as the greatest challenges of the position? Or what personal qualities are most important for the position? So you'll hear at this point those things that you're not going to find in writing, that they probably haven't shared with their recruiter, for example. But it will help you then to know, as you go deeper into the interview, how to slant your answers to things. So, can I expect an invitation back for a second interview? At the end of each interview, obviously, hopefully during the interview, there's been some indication about whether or not they're liking you, whether or not, you know, they're going to want you to come back as a viable candidate for them. But if that nothing specifically comes up, asking that question lets you know where you stand. And if their initial answer is, well, I think that your background isn't quite a match. You seem to be lacking experience with X, Y, and Z. That gives you then an opportunity to perhaps fill in that blank, overcome that objection, if in fact you do have experience with X, Y, and Z. And if the interview has gone really well, you know you've made a personal connection, and they may well have even indicated that they want you to come back and meet so and so. But there's been no date, been no specific time where they want that to happen. Go ahead, be assumptive with your language and say, so when do you want to schedule that second interview? Let's get it on the calendar now while we're still together face to face. Tricky interview questions. They are in fact that, and they all require preparation in advance. So we're going to lay out about 12 of them for you to think about in advance. These first three are really self-promotional opportunities. What's your greatest strength? Well, of course, you need to prepare in ahead of time, identifying what your strengths are, tie them to your accomplishments, and be able to talk about how you think that those strengths and accomplishments would reflect within this company that you've done the research on. What motivates you? You'll answer this in relationship to what you know about the company as well. So if their senior research person has an international reputation, you can pretty much assume that they will have surrounded themselves by really smart people who are passionate about your work. Those obviously are the kinds of things that are going to be your motivators that you're going to talk about. How do you feel about the progress you made in your last position? Well, here again, you want to stress your accomplishments. So for example, at one point I headed up operations in Mexico, and then I moved on and headed up operations in Guatemala. And in both of those instances, the operations needed to be really turned around. So I was able, with my team of folks, to significantly increase the efficiency in both of those operations and able to reduce costs by 25%. As a result of that, they ultimately promoted me to be VP of the entire region. So again, stressing your accomplishments. These next three are really what I think about as loaded questions. What's your greatest weakness? Again, that's something that you need to think about and prepare in advance. One of the things that is the strongest way to address this is to tie a weakness into what ultimately is really a strength. So for example, my greatest weakness is that I am a real stickler around detail. The problem is that very few people like a micromanager as their boss. So in my last situation, what I did was I asked each of my team to develop a checklist of all of the weekly tasks that they needed to accomplish. And in that way, they had autonomy to structure that the way that worked best for them, but it satisfied my need for knowing that quality control was on everybody's top of their list each week. What don't you like to do? Well, this is another loaded question because we all have preferences and things that we prefer to do. But the bottom line message here is that I'm going to do whatever it takes to get the job done. However, if there's something that I prefer less to do, Typically, what I do is I get that done first, I get it out of the way, and then I can focus most of my attention on the things that bring me more professional pleasure, if you will. So, what kinds of frustrations do you have with your current job? Frustrations are normal, they happen to everybody. Another way to describe them might be bottlenecks that you encounter. And so just make sure that you have your stories about describing the bottleneck, but then your workarounds and how you overcame them. These next or final six questions are probably fall under the category of miscellaneous types of questions. So, can you work under pressure? The answer to this is absolutely, of course. But pressure is different in every situation, and pressure is different for each individual. So the task here is to say, yeah, I thrive under pressure, but what does pressure look like in this environment, or what do you consider to be a pressure cooker? Find out from them what their thinking is on that. What do you think about your current or last manager? Here, you never, ever, ever say anything negative about a past manager. So if you didn't have the best of relationships, you really need to identify something that did work well, that we always kept the lines of communication open to us. Even though we didn't always agree to agree on things, we always had great lines of communication. If you malign that current or past manager, the message you're giving is that at some point, if they hire you, you're going to be maligning them. So you don't say anything negative here. How would your boss or coworkers describe you? Here again, obviously, you're going to focus on the positive um, aspects of your relationships, but you want to make sure that you identify things that, especially with your boss, if he gets asked for a reference, that he's going to be on the same page with you. So if you say certain things about that relationship, make sure you get back to him before he gets called for your reference. What's been your greatest failure? Some of us have already experienced some pretty big implosions in our work lives. Um, Others of us who might be younger and less experienced, um, or perhaps those of us who've just been totally successful, might have a little difficulty trying to answer this. Um, if you've had a failure, and quite frankly, most of us have, you want to be able to, under the best of circumstances, been able to recover from that failure in that situation and make it right before you left. Sometimes that failure could be showing you to the door, but in your next employment, you found an opportunity to avoid having a similar situation, and in fact to actually add value to the company because of that, what you learned from that past failure. Why do you want to work for our company? That's a pretty often asked question, quite frankly. And most people give a very general answer, but that's the wrong answer. You don't want to say, well, you guys have very generous compensation packages, great benefits, lots of vacation. The answer here is to talk about their products, their policies, their mission statements, the kinds of things that really attract you and make them a serious kind of attraction for you to want to work there and commit your time and energies to. And why should I hire you? Well, here you have to really remember and know all of the job requirements. Again, have your accomplishments fresh in mind, have your stories ready, and align them to the opportunity at hand. So what happens after the interview? You always want to leave time to process afterwards. So even if you have a Zoom interview while working from home, build in time to go out to your kitchen, get a beverage of choice, collect your thoughts before you sign back into your current job. If you're working with an external recruiter, give them a call. They're going to want to hear from you immediately. They're going to want to know how it went, what kinds of questions they asked you, what kinds of answers you gave. Fill them in so that then they can call the company and find out additional information. Make notes for yourself. What kinds of questions did they ask? What kinds of answers did you have? Critique how you felt you answered those questions. Be honest. This is for yourself. Did you remember some questions that you forgot to ask? Write it down. Do you have strengths that you forgot to mention? Write them down. Those business cards you gathered, or the contact information for the team that interviewed you, this is where you're going to use it. You're going to send an immediate email, and basically in that quick email, you're simply going to thank them for their time and express your ongoing interest in the job. And then within 48 hours, you're going to send a more formal kind of thank you note. Don't think me just old school, but I want you to consider the possibility of actually sending handwritten notes. Now, if you're a young folk right out of college and you interviewed with an IT startup that were all young whippersnappers, you're probably not going to send a handwritten note. You're going to use email and technology. But especially if you're at a more senior level, I can't tell you probably the hundreds of people that I've interviewed over the course of my career. And I can tell you, though, the small handful of people who took the time to send me a handwritten thank you, I remember those people. It makes you stand out. So use your best judgment about written or email. And the next two slides, we're going to take a look at what you're going to say in more detail in that thank you note. If you haven't heard from them in 1 to 2 weeks, you want to consider reaching out to them. However, the caveat here is that hopefully in the interviewing process, you have asked them and identified how long their interviewing process is going to be before they're ready to take the next step. So if they've told you that the CEO is traveling in Asia and won't be back and able to put his attention on this particular hiring process for a month, then you're not going to reach out in 1 to 2 weeks. Unless, of course, you run across an article or something of interest that you discussed in the interview and you want to just do a follow-up with it. If you don't get the offer, ask for some constructive criticism. Let them know that they are a company of choice of yours. And if there are things that you can do between now and the next time they have an opening that might be a good fit for you, you'd like to begin to fill in those gaps. Bottom line, stay in touch, add them to your network, and always be networking. So here's an example of a thank you letter. It's a pretty basic letter, thanking them for the interview, naming the job specifically that they interviewed for. Expressing their confidence that they have the skills needed to fill it successfully, looking forward to a second interview, excited about some of the things that they talked about, their expansion and the opportunities for growth. Again, thank you, and how to be easily contacted. But let's take a look at that pretty much same letter, but in a revised format. Here's again, thanking for interviewing in the driving position. It's important that you list the position because some people have multiple openings at the same time, and on the same day, they might interview people for all 3 of those openings. So help them remember which job you had applied for. Your plans are exciting. My knowledge of customer service issues would allow me to implement your new programs, tying strengths to their situation. I'd like to summarize additional points that we didn't get to discuss. And look at the 3 points that got left out. Over 2 million driving miles without an accident or insurance claim, certified to drive double trailers, and certified in handheld tracking systems. These are all qualities, characteristics, that would describe a driver that you would probably want to have on your driving team if that was your business. So thinking again, excited about joining you, reiterating what you had just talked in the interview, that you will reach out to them on Tuesday concerning the second interview, and again, making it easy to get in touch with you if they want to talk with you sooner than next Tuesday. So each process has its own structure, depending on the company, depending on the level within the corporate structure. But these are the kinds of things you want to be thinking about at each interview stage. Who is it that will be making the final decision? Sometimes you're meeting with the person who has the opening, but it's really the CEO who has to give the final stamp of approval. So you want to have that identified as soon as possible. If you get to the CEO, it's going to be your job to lose at that point, but you need to understand that. How many other serious candidates are there? If you can figure out, you know, what your competition is, sorry about that, what your competition is, who they are, a little bit about their background, you'll be able to better direct your answers to better compete with them. I'm very interested in the position. Is there anything else you can tell me or that I can tell you, and that materials I could bring to influence your decision? Again, you're being proactive. You're telling them how serious you are about the job and that you're willing to do whatever you can to make it an easy decision for them to offer you the job. When can I expect to hear from you? This will tell you how soon for you to reach out to them again. When would you like me to start? This is really an assumptive kind of question. Hopefully would be met with some humor and a smile, but tells them, I'm there, I'm yours. You make me the right offer. You know, there's going to be no hesitation on my part. And another similar kind of statement or question to ask is, what challenges would you have me tackle first? We've talked about a number of things. Where would you want me to start day one, that you're ready to jump in right from day one? So then that final tile that we looked at, when does the interviewing process end? Do you have the offer that you want? Is it the right financial package, right benefit package, right relocation package? What if there's no offer, but you really still want to work for them? You don't want to end your relationship with them because they chose someone else. You want to continue to dialogue with them. You want to continue to network with them. You never know how your paths may cross. If you're in the same industry, your paths will most likely cross at some point in the future. And who knows, they may network for you and want to know who you know that they can talk to when they're looking for their next opportunity. What if you're able to overcome one of their objections to your background? You're not going to know that unless you ask them what the objections are and give yourself a real fighting chance here. What if you end up in this perfect situation? You get another strong offer with a company that's perfectly respectable, but the bottom line is they're your second choice, and boy, you'd really like to have your first choice. Reach out to them. Tell them that you have a second offer. Let them know that you have to give this other company an answer by whenever, next Tuesday. Clarify with when they extend the offer to you, when you can get back to them with your answer, and say, I haven't heard from you. You haven't made your decision yet, but this is my situation. I'm letting you know because you're my first choice. Is there any way that you can pull the trigger on your final decision? But don't pull this stunt if you don't really have a second offer on the table. Don't try to use this to force their hand because it always will backfire. Build a relationship with them for the future. Keep your name active in their mind. And as always, network, network, network. So how about any questions that you might have? Razib?
Wonderful. Thank you, Maureen. So yeah, we do already have one question. So this is actually a very interesting one. Are there any ground rules for interviewing for a position while currently employed and needing to keep your job search confidential?
Well, it has to do, I know, ground rules. So you don't talk about the fact that you're looking with your colleagues, even, people that you feel are your good, your close work friends, maybe even folks you go out to dinner with after work. You keep your job search to yourself. If it's a small, tight industry, um, then um, asking for confidentiality from the interviewing company's point of view right away is an appropriate thing to do. Let them know that your search is confidential and that you can, is it safe for you to assume that until we're ready to move forward and you're ready to make me an offer, that our my search with you will be, my name will be kept confidential. So you make that really explicit.
Okay. So people want your slide. Would you share with them?
Sure.
Okay. Okay. So I had a question. So you mentioned about in your slides, like during the interview. So nowadays in the Zoom era, you meet like people either not in a coffee shop, but in a really an online environment.
Right.
So how much does the process of your closing the deal and and whatnot that comes afterwards, how much does the process have to, I mean, like you have to modify?
Well, the location is different. But if the entire process is conducted online, then the rules are pretty much the same. Obviously, you can't exchange in the moment hard copies of things, but you could, for example, if asked, you could certainly email a PDF of something that in a face to face environment you might be handing them. Um, I think that it's harder for sure to make personal contact via the technology. This, quite frankly, is my first training event online. And even in preparing for tonight, I realized how differently this was going to be. I wanted to have your faces up as participants, but it interfered with the slides, and it was something that I needed to figure out what was going to be the best way for me. I mean, I like to make eye contact. I in fact typically will pick people out of the audience to really focus on and to engage interactively with. That's harder online, quite frankly. But I think after you establish how you're going to share those concrete materials, the conversation kinds of things are pretty much the same. You have to, as much as humanly possible, take the face on the screen as a human being that you're going to be with. And so those small nuances of personal engagement, um, the cues that you're going to pick up on, it just takes refined skill, but I don't think that they're different skills. I just think that your attention to it is probably needs to be sharper in the moment. And beyond that, I think that it has to be a learned experience, quite frankly.
Okay, thanks, Maureen. So there are a couple more questions. So one of them is, if during the first interview you start thinking something big is going to happen, or something big is going to have to change for me to want this job, Do you withdraw from the position right away? If not, how do you word your thank you note so that you are not gushing and lying about your interest, but still keeping the door open?
If there's a major objection, um, the person who's interviewing you in some way is inappropriate and you know there is no way in heck that you're going to work with him, then I think withdrawing is, perhaps an appropriate step to take. But I would caution about withdrawing too soon because there are always multiple layers within an organization. And if you simply have more questions, then give yourself the opportunity to answer those questions. Um, if nothing else, you'll have interviewing experience. And experience goes a long of learning how to smoothly refer to your accomplishments and the stories about it. And rarely are people really strong interviewers the first, second, or third times that they have an interview. That's why people will sometimes set up mock interviews if they've got strong mentors in their lives to help them practice about how do you really um, answer questions in a smooth and flowing kind of way. So if nothing else, hang on to the opportunity for practice. And in the end, it won't matter if you decide that you really don't want the company. All you've done is improved your own interviewing skills. Um, Always remain gracious when the time to exit. I mean, chances are, if you really are adverse to something, they're going to, on some level, pick that up, and you probably won't end up with the offer. But in the meantime, take advantage of the practice time. Would be my recommendation.
Great. So another question is that given that someone is undergoing a lot of interviews in the job search process,
Uh-huh.
and if they really don't have a sense of when and how to reach out to people in companies that they would like to work for, but that don't have openings at this moment, what tips do you have for that person in that regard?
Well, I mean, that ties into your networking skills, and that's another whole probably topic for an evening's discussion. But networking is about talking with people to find out who they know, what suggestions do they have for you, trying to identify if they know, you don't come out and ask if they have a job for you. But of course, one of the beautiful things that can happen from an interviewing or from a networking contact is that somebody says, well, yeah, hey, I know somebody over in X, Y, and Z company, and we had dinner the other night, and they were saying that they're looking for um, uh, an IT engineer. Let me give them a call. Send me your resume, and I'll pass it along to them and see whether or not you might be a match. So the point is to identify who who knows whom. Now, if you have a particular company that you're interested in, and boy, this would be your first choice, be sure about what you think about the company is in fact accurate about the company. And then if you know people as part of your networking uh, group, who are in a similar industry or in a similar geography, ask them if they know anybody at such and such a place. Could they recommend somebody to reach out to? There's lots of ways at times. Sometimes companies are very, very protective of the names that go along with their particular roles, like who's their controller, because they don't want executive search folks coming in and stealing their top people. But it's often possible to find out who, say you want to be an accountant at Google, and your forte is budgeting. So your goal would be who is the controller of Google, who heads up their budget area and see if you can get a name. Um, Part of networking is to identify jobs that are not published. In this day and age where there are lots of job boards where companies post jobs on their company websites, these are jobs that hundreds, if not thousands of people have easy access to. Therefore, your competition is going to be extraordinary in most instances. And the person who receives your resume is going to give you 10 to 15 seconds to make an impression with your paperwork before you hit the circular file. So while it's possible to get a job, to find a job because it's advertised someplace, the further up you go on the corporate ladder, if you will, or within your field, outside of the corporate environment, but within your field, the best jobs are going to be jobs that you're not going to find advertised. And there you're going to have to really have honed in on your networking skills and get to be able to find an introduction to that person that you need to talk to. But like I say, networking is a highly developed skill, and I think it's probably a topic that's best explored in more detail in a, in a standalone presentation. Might be something for the future.
Yeah. Thank you, Maureen. I think you hit the nail with the hammer, is that like mentorship and networking take you way,
Right.
way far. So another question is there, before you accept a position, how do you find out about the morale among the current employees and if it is a positive work environment or not?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of the greatest tools that I'm aware of is to go to Glassdoor. That's a website where people talk about their companies and will share salary information, will share information about past managers, will share anecdotes about what it's like to work in that environment. So that's a good resource. If certainly if you can identify someone who works there or who has worked there, that's another opportunity. Often culture, though, there is definitely something called a corporate culture. But within divisions, within departments, that culture can be very different. I think part of assessing that, aside from these, a more, a place like Glassdoor or knowing someone who actually worked there, is to be looking for those kinds of cues when you're interacting with the boss. Because the culture within a particular team, within a department, is formed by the head of that particular team. And so what's your social interaction like with that person? Are you able to feel like they're engaged with you? Are they completely standoffish from you? Do they smile? Are you able to engage with one another, whether that's face to face or electronically through a Zoom meeting? That will tell you a little bit about their personality and whether or not it's going to be a good match for you. Personally, myself, I like to use humor wherever I can. I think it takes us long distances in short periods of time. And so if I'm having trouble connecting with someone, I'll find a way to interject something of humor with them and see what their reaction is. So typically when I'm training, if I've got someone in the audience who's, sort of stonewalling me, I'll find a way to speak with them directly, one-on-one, ideally in a humorous way, but to see what their reaction is, bring them out of their head, see whether or not they're willing to engage with me. And that tells me a lot about who I've got sitting there in front of me. So I think that those are the softer skill ways of how do you feel talking with this person? Are they someone that you could go to with a problem, a work problem, and feel comfortable that they could help you find the workaround with it or not?
Okay, so we are almost running out of time, but some like one last question is that do you have any tip on how to approach your first job or career change?
Um, well, you that require a career change is very possible. I'm someone who's done that actually multiple times. Um, but that takes a different kind of headset, of mindset when you're preparing your materials in advance. It's a totally different kind of resume. Um, and to write, it's called a functional resume, which highlights your skills and your talents as opposed to the chronology of what you've done in your job titles or the industries in which you've worked. Um, and so the focus in preparing for that is to identify the skills that you have, the experiences that you have that are going to align with the new industry that you want to enter into or that that job might require. So, for example, in my own situation, one of the things that I have always done, whether I've been working in corporate America, whether I'm working in a healthcare environment, whether it's an entrepreneurial environment or an educational environment, I'm always teaching. The age of my audience has varied greatly over the years, but I'm always teaching, I'm educating, I'm trying to inform, I'm trying to engage, I'm trying to help people with critical thinking skills. And so if I were writing a functional resume, that would be one of the things that I would identify about myself. And then the new industry that I think that I want to become part of, where, well, first of all, is that a critical skill to have? And if it is, what would that look like in that environment? So if I'm teaching, I'm making this one up, but if I'm teaching in a third grade classroom, what are those teaching skills that would transfer into a training and development arena where students are going to be adults? Okay, so it's finding those things that you already have in your toolkit and then being able to transition them to explain to the new environment how you really have the strong background that will transition very easily because you've already done what you need, they need you to do. It just looks different.
Thank you, Maureen. It was really wonderful to get your insight about all this nuance and all these different aspects of the interview process and the job search process. So, I mean, I personally enjoyed it a lot and learned a few things. So, and thank you everyone for attending our today's seminar. We will be hosting another seminar on resume writing pretty soon. So that's a good segue for today's meeting. I'd like to thank again Maureen and thank everyone. And as Maureen mentioned, the mentoring and the networking are the most important thing for any job search process. So this is something that is the bread and butter of the Ergon Hub. So where we as professionals from different industry, we participate in mentorship, we participate in networking and as well as this kind of a seminar. So yeah, do let us know if you have any questions or any needs of mentorship or things. We'll try to accommodate. Thank you everyone and have a great evening. Take
Good
care.
night, everyone.
Good
Thank
night.
you for being here tonight.